Welcome to How You Livin', a transformative podcast featuring best-selling author, inspirational speaker, and minister, Dr. Rick Rigsby. And now, Dr. Rick.
Hello, friends. Thanks so much for listening. We're discussing driving change in our lives in a positive way. And why discuss this topic? I'm glad you asked. Change is the prerequisite for growth. Whether we're talking personal goals or continuing on with our professional development, if you're on cruise control, if we're merely just existing, maintaining the status quo, if we're not moving forward, we're not growing. In fact, we're even going backwards. We're inviting entropy, which is the second law of thermodynamics, that suggests anything made up of a physical matter is in the process of decay and eventual chaos. If we're not moving forward, we're not even remaining stagnant, we're going backwards, and that's not good. If we're not changing, friends, we're not growing. So to change, to evolve, means a commitment to forward progress. Positive forward change not only decreases entropy, but it increases our overall level of satisfaction. I recall Harvard Business Review did a survey years ago asking employees one simple question: what generates the greatest degree of employee satisfaction? The answer might surprise you. It wasn't money, it wasn't bonuses, it wasn't days off, but it was when the employee sensed that forward progress was occurring. I really believe that most people want to see forward progress in their lives. Sometimes we just need to be reminded how to get there, to take those first steps. And that's what motivates this series. My series is motivated by a personal journey to improve my health. To maintain this new lifestyle I am discovering requires a recommitment every single day. In other words, to maintain my new health lifestyle requires incorporating basic changes on a daily basis. I've said it before, I'll say it again. Losing weight, that was the easy part. Committing daily, that's the challenge. The challenge is associated to process, committing to continuing the process. In other words, I'm making a commitment toward positive forward momentum. That's why I believe the enemy of forward progress is being outcome-oriented. You see, we're a society obsessed with outcome over process. I recall many times as a college professor, there were always those students who would finish first on midterm day or final exam day. It seemed as though they thought finishing first was associated with excellence. Nothing could have been further from the truth, because what I discovered was invariably those who raced through the process of the exam typically scored lower than the others. It speaks to the fact that we've convinced ourselves outcome is everything. Outcome is the ultimate goal. But you don't learn when the focus is outcome. Great people realize that there is a difference between good and great, and that difference is found in the details, and the details are found in the process, which offers an excellent transition into part 3 of this series, a segment that I've titled Process. I know this doesn't sound sexy, but it's profoundly true and effective that if you want to realize any kind of sustained change, you must be committed to the process. But before we discuss process, let's review the first 2 elements that drive positive change in our lives. Part 1 of this series is titled Responsibility. I firmly believe that change will not occur unless we assume responsibility. Now, this seems like a small thing, but the mental shift moves us from justification to acknowledgement. And there's no one to blame when we move to acknowledgement. Making excuses simply are not tolerated. The problem for me is that I wanted change, I really did, but I wasn't willing to pay the price. I love this quote from Nick Saban, former Alabama head football coach. He said, everybody wants to win, but not everyone is willing to pay the price. You see, friends, winners assume responsibility. Winners are accountable. Winners don't blame others, and they don't make excuses. Winners don't expect others to do for them what they can do for themselves. Winners have a right estimate of themselves. I was privileged to serve Coach R.C. Slocum at Texas A&M University. I was part of his football coaching staff. I was the life skills coach as well as the chaplain. And I remember after a devastating loss where it seemed like our football team talked the entire game but did not perform on the field. I remember Coach Slocum walked into the locker room at the end of the game and he said this: "Losers talk, winners don't have to." I like that. Winners assume responsibility. They're accountable. They don't make excuses. They don't blame others. They don't expect others to do for themselves what they ought to do for themselves. And winners have a right estimate of themselves. They are acutely aware of weaknesses that need improvement and strengths that need exploitation. And winners are willing to pay the price. Great people, friends, do things that other people don't. They assume responsibility. And that's why the first element that drives change, responsibility. The second element that drives change, vision. For as long as I can remember, I wanted to make changes in my health. My desire was great. Boy, I've learned that wanting to, and even having desire, is not enough. You got to have more. I learned that sustained change requires more than want to. It requires more than desire. You see, friends, I had no plan for sustained change, no roadmap, no vision, just desire. And desire is good, but you need vision. Holy Scripture states, without a vision, the people perish, and friends, I was perishing. Looking back, I realized that the lack of a vision created space in my life for justifying poor behaviors. I would excuse things and blame circumstances, from emotions that I was feeling to schedules. I don't have time to work out. I don't have time to eat healthy. Without question, I can state emphatically, blaming others, blaming circumstances, blaming things, and making excuses and justifications blurred my vision. The result, no productivity. The result, I was not moving forward. Rather than moving forward in a positive way, my vision diminished. In fact, my vision became co-opted based on how I felt, or what situation or circumstance I found myself in, or what pain I may have been feeling at the time, whether that pain was physical or emotional or relational. I was driven by my emotions, not driven by this incredible commitment to sustain change based on a pragmatic vision. This is why I believe Samuel Chan's quote is so profound and worth requoting. You remember Samuel Chan. He wrote the book Leadership Pain, The Classroom for Growth. Chan's quote, listen carefully. "When we consider our pain more important than our vision, we will reduce our vision to the threshold of our pain." May I say that one more time? When we consider our pain more important than our vision, we will reduce our vision to the threshold of our pain. Samuel Chan. Friends, I advocate writing a mission statement on a daily basis. I should say I advocate writing a mission statement and then articulating that mission statement on a daily basis. Asking and answering the following questions in that mission statement. What has stopped me in the past? What specific changes do I desire? What must I implement this very day? What are my intentions this day? What's necessary for me to do? And what's my strategy statement? What is my vision? You see, I firmly believe that writing out a mission statement, a strategy statement, and then articulating it every day simply reminds our will, places a demand upon our will for the behaviors that we desire for that particular day. Also, asking the why question is a critical part of formulating vision. If I can't convince myself with good reasoning, I will not realize my goal, because reasons compel the will to act. Remember the words of Francis Bacon, that great British statesman, who said the duty and office of rhetoric is to apply reason to imagination if you want to move the will. This is why articulating a mission statement is so important. I have it And I find it helpful to refer to my personal mission statement every single morning. It reminds me why I'm putting in the work. It reminds me why I'm sacrificing. It reminds me why it's important to maintain the process. So, what's your mission statement? What's your strategy statement? What is it that you refuse to compromise on this very day? What is it that you refuse to negotiate away this very day? I'm learning, friends, that forward progress is not driven by motivation. It's not driven by willpower alone. Forward progress must be driven by assuming responsibility, having a pragmatic vision, and a commitment every day to process. When we choose to be responsible for ourselves, when we choose to develop a vision that is pragmatic and doable, and when we choose to commit daily to the process, we will experience forward progress. I believe this is why this third element that drives change is so critical, an element of committing to the process. Simply stated, outcome-oriented living just focuses on the bottom line. It focuses on just getting the job done, just reaching the destination with little regard for much else. So you'll hear people say all the time, just win the game. Just get the job done. Just finish. Just figure it out. Well, process-oriented living places a demand upon us to pay attention to the little details along the way that produce huge results. In other words, friends, you won't win the game without executing basics. You won't get the job done correctly without focus. You won't figure it out because you've not allowed time to think and reflect and seek advice and fail, make mistakes, and get back up. You see, all these elements produce the wisdom needed to figure it out. Ours is an outcome-oriented culture. Just finish the job. Just get it done. What's next? There's nothing inherently wrong with those things. However, if our focus is purely outcome, is exclusively outcome, we'll miss critical steps required to realize sustained change. An outcome orientation does not make time to address root issues. Regarding making changes in my health, I was seeking change from an outcome orientation for decades, and it resulted in frustration. What I now clearly see is that I was trying to sustain change by addressing superficial issues. In other words, I wasn't getting to the root of my problem. An outcome orientation does not make time, does not make effort to discover root issues. When my focus became the process, how I needed to think and speak and act on a daily basis, my new behavior made time, made room for me to see more clearly the root issue. In fact, the root issue in my life became crystal clear. I had developed a deep and intimate, unhealthy relationship with food. Outcome orientation says just lose weight. Just get the job done. Just get to the bottom line. Just look forward to weighing again. But taking time, developing a pragmatic roadmap, assuming responsibility, having a clear vision, and in this case, focusing on the process every day helped me to see the root issue, a poor and unhealthy relationship, connection with food. I refused to clearly see and acknowledge the reasons why I didn't move from desire to change. I refused to see those because my focus was outcome. But now, looking at the process, realizing that change is process driven, I see clearly every single day the necessity to constantly recommit to the basics. I'm telling you, friends, I remind myself daily that I'm on a journey that requires recommitting, not to be afraid to recommit to steps, to habits. Process is powerful. Process is powerful. Process is powerful. So this day, slow down. Think about your life with a right estimate of yourself and what you want to accomplish. Choose to assume responsibility without excuses. Create a vision that's doable. Create a vision that's pragmatic. Formulate a mission statement, a game plan, and articulate it every single day. And then practice these basics daily. Friends, this is called process. And the results you'll realize will blow your mind. I think right now as I close about some simple lessons from my dad, the wisest man I ever met in my life, a third grade dropout. He said to me on one occasion, "Son, do you want to be great?" I said, "Yes, Daddy, I do." He says, "Remember this, execute the basics better than anybody else, and you'll grow your capacity for what you want." It's called paying attention to the process. Well, that's going to do it for this episode. Until we meet again, this is Dr. Rick, asking the most important question I can ask. How you living?
Are you ready to make an impact in your world right now? Do you want to stop existing and start living your best life right now? Dr. Rick wants to give you the first chapter of his best-selling book, Lessons from a Third Grade Dropout, absolutely free. Just go to www.rickrigsby.com/free gift to get the print or audiobook right now.
This is the podcastfactory.com.